Hey, my beautiful friend, it is so wonderful to see you. Thank you so very much for joining us. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is Reading with Your Kids Rewind, moments worth resharing from the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're just about at Christmas, and as we're preparing for Christmas, we thought it would be great to look back at 4 episodes where we celebrated the message of Christmas, the message that Christ brought to us of loving each other, loving God, and serving others. Our first guest is Father Greg Boyle. Father Greg is the author of Tattoos on the Heart and Barking to the Choir. He's also the founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention unit in the world. Back in January of 2019, my beautiful wife and I were out at the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards in Los Angeles, and I had a chance to sit down with Father Greg at Homeboy Industries. It was an amazing experience for me. If anybody's in the LA area, I would absolutely encourage you to check out Homeboy Industries. See the amazing work that they are doing to help people change their lives. The episode with Father Greg was first published March 7th, 2019, and it was called Barking to the Choir. Here's Father Greg Boyle. That was one of the things that struck me and moved me, that idea of radical kinship. How do you think parents can kind of share that with their young kids?
Well, I think parents can do this by challenging their kids, because we're human beings, and so naturally we draw lines. Mm-hmm. Us, them, they belong to our group, they don't belong to our group. This is a bad person, we keep that person out. And so the more parents can get their kids to see in a different way, well, obviously we're all going to be better off, because then you're going to be able to erase margins and erase boundaries and imagine a circle of compassion, and then your kids are going to be able to imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So that's the goal. I mean, in the end, you can draw a straight line from that issue, the drawing of lines, and every single social ill we face, from the current government shutdown to immigration issues to the racial divide, they all kind of rest on that notion that somehow there's an us and a them, and we all have to win, and if we have to win, then that means somebody has to lose,
right? And
so these are dangerous kinds of concepts, I think.
One of the things I love in both of the books is the idea of just recognizing and seeing the God that's living inside all of us.
Yeah, it wants to propose something more spacious and expansive, an understanding. So we settled for a tiny and a puny and a vindictive and a punitive God, and basically the God created in our own image. And so the invitation is to move beyond that to something more broad and expansive, as I said, and something that is more inclusive. So I think there's nothing more consequential in the world than how we see God, because you're kind of doomed to imitate the kind of God you believe in. And if your God is puny and tiny, then that's what's going to happen, and that's how you will see. But here we deal with gang members, and so the notion here is about trying to get underneath criminality, if you will, and how are we to see it, and how are we to understand it, and so that we can get underneath it and have a different diagnosis than the one that we always embrace. Tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. So this place kind of invites the world to become that. So it wants to be what it thinks the world is invited to become. And so So you can feel it here. Otherwise, nothing works. You can't deliver services unless it's a place of tenderness and trust and where people feel safe. And so that's kind of what this place offers. And once they can enter and inhabit that sacred place of where people feel safe and valued and there's trust, then they can, inhabit the truth of who they are, that they're exactly what God had in mind, what God made them. So then they become that self, and then they can leave here after 18 months resilient people, and they can embrace the adventure, which is the world out there.
Yeah.
And then now they know how to navigate all the crises of intimacy and generativity and all the things that are going to get thrown at them, and they won't get toppled by it this time.
Yeah. I really want to encourage you to check out our entire conversation with Father Greg Boyle. You can find it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Listen to the Podcast Here button. That'll take you to our podcast page where you can use the search tool to search out Barking to the Choir, and it was first published March 7th, 2019. In April of 2019, I had a wonderful opportunity to sit down with a friend of mine. Phil Joel is one of the top Christian recording artists in the world. He's a former member of the monster band, the Newsboys. He tours with the band occasionally now as Newsboys United. He also has his own solo project. It's called Zealand Worship. Phil told us that he wrote Redwoods in Wales while he was on tour with Zealand Worship. Had a really fun time talking to my friend. We first published this episode April 28th, 2019, and it is titled Redwoods in Wales. Well, we're awfully glad that you wrote a book, and those are really powerful images, especially to get, one day after another. And
right.
As you were talking about the whale being distracted, and yeah, I agree. There's so many kids are distracted these days, and there's so much to and not only kids, but there's so much to distract us.
Oh yeah.
Where you and I are speaking through the magic of technology, and it is magical, but it can be kind of dangerous too, I think.
Yeah, it can. It can be. I mean, you're right. We live in this really wild day and age, which is it's incredible. I love being alive in this exciting time where all sorts of new things are coming, into the foray and all kinds of new technologies. But often these things can, if we're not careful, they can turn around and bite us, and they pose as friends at different points and promise certain things, and then after a while we realize they're taking more than they're giving. And for me, I in the book I take a look at the social media issue in our time. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I can post photographs of my kids and my backyard chickens, and my relatives in New Zealand can see them. If I wanted to, if I was actually an active social media person, which it's amazing stuff, right?
Right.
Years gone by, obviously I had to stick photographs, develop photographs down at the chemist or the pharmacy, and stick them in envelopes and send them. And it would take 2 weeks,
Sure.
So yes, amazing things going on, but and we're more connected than ever in some ways, but then we're also more lonely than ever. This next generation coming through is the most medicated and depressed and suicidal bunch we've ever seen. And so we've got to put some of these things that we're all involving ourselves in under the microscope and sort of say, hey, is this worth my time? Is this taking more than it's giving? Is this promising a lot but actually taking more out of me than I'm getting? What do we need to do? And as parents, as an older generation, we need to help this next generation coming through. We need to help them be courageous in certain. Some of them need to not just back away from it a little bit and curb their use. Some people really just need to trash certain things. Need to just be brave enough to go, you know what? I don't need that app. I don't need that activity in my life. I need to get rid of it. And because it's trashing me. So maybe it's time for me to trash it. So
Yeah.
I sort of, I throw some of those things out there in order to hopefully jolt some people into, really putting some of the ways they're spending their time and energy under the microscope. Just throw it under the microscope, take a look and see if it's really something we need to be doing.
And one of the things, talk about theology, and one of the things you go through, that you mentioned a number of times in the book is, hey, if you're not a God guy, I'm not quoting you, but if
Yeah.
I'm not, don't be preaching, but just hang with me for a minute. And the theology that is expressed in the book so clearly, and I think it's the most important theology, is that God loves you.
Right.
The chapter in the book that was especially meaningful to me a number of different occasions was, and because I listened to it again and again, was chapter 8, where you talk about that in reminding us it doesn't matter. Well, you can you tell better than me, but just talking about the fact that we're not mistakes.
Right. We're not mistakes. I mean, I as you've read the book there, you've discovered, unless we've talked about it before, which we may have, I'm an adopted kid, and grew up in a fantastic family. But there's also, being an adopted kid, somehow there's often a sort of an underlying feeling of, I'm not really meant to be here. I don't really belong. I kind of just happened by mistake. I'm really happy that my life is what it is, and I'm glad I'm here, but, it's just, I just made it somehow, by the skin of my teeth. Here I am. But, so you have this underlying sort of feeling, and at least when you're adopted, you're kind of aware of that, because you're like, you know what, I not by circumstances due to my own hand or my own, but I made it to earth, but it was not the regular sort of way, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's kind of right there and identified. Well, obviously I'm not going to feel connected as much as some others, but it's not just a adopted kid phenomena. It's not just a kid in the foster care phenomena. I think so many of us just feel like we don't belong, feel like we're not really meant to be here. We don't really have a purpose. We're just a bunch of sort of cells just bumbling around on this planet, and we're not even sure, we're not sure if we're meant to be here and if we have a purpose greater than just eating, sleeping, and watching TV or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, God is real. We've got to get that locked and loaded. God is real. God is good. God knows who we are because He created us. We're not mistakes. He knit us together, fashioned our hearts, and knows exactly who we are, knows what makes us tick, and He really, really likes us. There's those three things we have to get locked and loaded in our heads. And it's easier said than done, I think, sometimes, but the truth is the truth. And so the truth isn't afraid of our questions. We can ask, like, what am I doing here? Am I meant to be here? The answers are there. And as we cry out to God, He will show us. He will answer us, and He'll speak and show us that we are actually loved, that He does see us, and that He does get us. That's kind of one of the core messages in the book, honestly, that we are seen, that we are understood, and we are loved by God. Because if we don't understand that, and we don't dwell on that and allow that to just sort of really permeate into our souls, then we're going to look for that from other places. And this, I'll say this next generation, but I'm saying I think it's all of us.
Sure.
We're all looking to be seen and to be understood and to be liked.
I think you would love listening to the entire conversation I had with Phil Joel. It was published April 28th, 2019. It was titled Redwoods in Wales. And of course, you can find it at readingwithyourkids.com. You can also find the Reading with Your Kids podcast on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Ghana, Himalaya, Podchaser, Good Pods. Wherever you find your podcast, you can find the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And you can find the interview with our next guest, Father James Martin. He came on the show to talk about his book, Learning to Pray. The interview was first published on February 13th of this year, 2021. And in the interview, I remembered some things from my childhood that were pretty wonderful memories. I hope you enjoy them. Here's Father James Martin. One thing I would like you to do is just talk a little bit about what the Jesuits are.
Sure. So the Jesuits are a Catholic religious order. What does that mean? It means that we're like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Trappists, the Benedictines. We live in community. I literally live in a community with 12 other Jesuits. We take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In the United States, we're best known, we were just talking about, for our work in education, which is very appropriate for this podcast. We run not only high schools like BC High and colleges like Boston College, but today we run middle schools like the Cristo Rey model schools, which people might know about. We run nativity schools all over the country, and so we're very well known for our education. We also run parishes and retreat houses, and we work with refugees, and pretty much any occupation you can imagine someone doing, we do as Jesuits. So, but yeah, and our spirituality can be summed up, I think, as you know well, in finding God in all things. Mm-hmm. But I think in the United States, people know us mainly for our schools and our powerhouse basketball teams as well.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to share a little bit about your community with us, because I think that really is probably has a lot to do with what inspired you to write Learning to Pray.
Yeah, it does. It came out of my experience as a Jesuit, but it really is, as the subtitle says, it's a guide for everyone. And so you don't have to be Catholic. You don't have to be someone who knows what a Jesuit is. It's really meant for people who, are just starting to pray, but also for people who pray regularly and need a little pointers, because I think there's so many misconceptions about what prayer is. And that goes, and I talk a lot about childhood prayer in the book as well, right, which I think is probably appropriate, for parents and teachers to consider, because I think kids are naturally disposed to prayer, but they're sometimes not encouraged to do it.
Mm-hmm. You're right. I think kids do, and I think kids naturally have conversations with God.
Yeah, I think they're less self-conscious, shall we say. And you know more about teaching kids than I do, but I think they're less self-conscious. I think they're more imaginative in their minds. Not all kids, of course. And I talk in my book about an early experience I had where, I was going to school and had this pretty profound experience of God's presence, not because I'm some saint or some mystic, but because, kids are open to those kinds of things. But again, they're not encouraged to talk about them very much, for a number of reasons. So in the book, I talk about ways that we can recognize children's natural spirituality and their natural spiritual bent.
You're mentioning a spiritual moment when you're a kid. When I was a kid, oftentimes my mom would go to the Franciscan Friary in Brookline, Mass. For confession, probably because she didn't want the priest at St. Mary's to figure out who she was. But they had this statue of Jesus in a wall, and he was behind bars. It was when he was imprisoned, and he's there with the crown of thorns. And when I was waiting outside for my mom to come out, I crawled in between the bars and was sitting next to Jesus.
Wow.
And having a conversation with him, about, that must hurt, and I really feel bad.
Wow.
I'm sorry that you're hurting. And I felt that kind of profound spiritual moment that you were kind of talking about.
Well, I think thanks for sharing that with me. I think that's really beautiful. And I think that kids, like you were at that age, not self-conscious about that. You'd be much more self-conscious about it as an adult. And you might even question what was happening, right, to you, sort of that feeling. But I think that happens a lot. And I think that we need to invite kids to see those opportunities to pray as something that's available to them, but also to take those seriously. The other thing is to take those seriously. Those spiritual experiences are just as important as someone who goes on a retreat, who's an adult. So that's really a beautiful encounter. Of course, you and I couldn't probably fit through those bars these days.
We talk here in the show a lot about how parents can help kids visualize how they can solve problems by reading books together. Learning to pray is a great way for parents to help kids develop that relationship and develop that habit of prayer. And so we're oftentimes talking about how parents can help kids through books. You've written a book not too long ago that I think a kid could really help, especially a teen or a tween, can really help a parent with. And that's your book, Building a Bridge, how the Catholic Church and the LGBT community can build bridge. I know I'm killing the title, but
that's okay. It's a long subtitle.
But I think that this idea of having relationships, having friendships, having radical kinships with our LGBT brothers and sisters is a little bit harder for old guys like me than it is for my kids who were tweens and teens. Well, now they're in their 20s.
That's a good point. And I sometimes think that, so the book is about how the Catholic Church can reach out to the LGBT community and treat them with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, which is in the Catechism. And you are absolutely right. The younger generation, I'd say, even down to like high school, college, are much more comfortable with this topic, because they have friends who are LGBT, or they're used to it from pop culture or from their reading, and it's just something that sometimes they're more advanced in terms of their understanding and their tolerance, or their welcome, you could say, or their inclusion is a better word, than their parents are. And it's very funny you should bring that up, because oftentimes I'll talk to kids who are in college who say, my parents reject me, or they have problems because of their, religious beliefs, even though I don't think it should conflict, or my grandmother, or whatever. And I sometimes say to the young person, usually this is a college student, that you may know more about this topic than they do. Mm-hmm. And so you need to be patient with them. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to, I don't think this is breaking any confidences. I was talking to my nephew who is 15, and he was talking about a person in the school who was transgender. And I said, well, how do you treat this person? And he was shocked. And he said, I treat him fine. Why would I treat him differently? And I just thought, boy, now that is just, so for him, it's less about, whether or not the child is transgender, right? Or LGBT or whatever. It's just, this is my friend, and he actually said, oh, he's really funny. So everybody likes him. So I think that the younger generation is just a little more advanced. And yeah, I think that book, Building a Bridge, which is written on a fairly, inviting level, would be a great conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely.
For parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. You were mentioning grandparents maybe having a hard time with this. I have this great memory. My grandmother was awesome. She was my best friend. She'd ride in the back of my motorcycle, go to the pro wrestling matches with me at the garden.
That's great.
But I came home one day with an earring, and she said to me, now, does that mean, it doesn't make any difference one way or the other, but does that mean that you're gay? And I said, no, it doesn't. She goes, oh, okay, well, I have some great earrings if you want. You're welcome to them.
And what year would that have been?
That was, I think, 83, 82.
That's amazing. To say that in 1983 as a grandparent is amazing.
Yeah.
And I have to say, this is sort of off topic, but one of the things that is the best predictor of how LGBT kids are able to integrate themselves is how their parents and grandparents welcome them or don't welcome them. Mm-hmm. And it's a really important thing. Just something, I think that's such a beautiful little story. Like, it's okay if you were. Mm-hmm. And she's asking, and she's kind of putting it on the table and making it okay. That if you had been gay, that would have been a huge thing for you, right? To just be so welcome. So, yeah. So anyway, the book, I think the book would be a good conversation starter for people.
Yeah. You can find our entire conversation with Father James Martin. It was published February 13th, 2021. It was titled Learning to Pray, and that's available on our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and also on your favorite podcasting platform. Hey, we'd love it also if you could connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at readingwithyourkids on Instagram, at Gently Magic on Twitter. We also have a great Pinterest page, Reading With Your Kids. And of course, if you go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, you can use a contact button to send us a message. Our final guest on this episode of Reading With Your Kids Rewind is Matthew Paul Turner. He tells us how he was tasked to finish a book that his friend started writing. The name of the book is What is God Like? It was published this year, June 15th, 2021. Here, returning to the podcast, is our friend, Matthew Paul Turner. Matthew, welcome back to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's good to be back. How are you?
I'm pretty wonderful. But I have to tell you, it must have taken a lot of chutzpah to write a book called What is God Like? That's one of those age-old questions that no one seems to be able to answer.
Sure, absolutely. But this book was started by a friend of mine who started it 6 weeks prior to becoming sick and passing away 6 weeks later after becoming sick. And so I was taking my friend's idea. Rachel Held Evans is her name. And she is she was a wonderful author, very well known, New York Times bestseller. And she had started writing children's books ideas before she passed away. And I had the honor to take what she started and build on it and finish it and kind of bring it across the finishing line. And so it probably wouldn't have been something that I would have tried to tackle, but Rachel was more of a theologian than I am. And how the idea that she outlined is powerful, and yet it leaves room for people for kids to ask questions and have really wonderful discussions. What I love about this book that's very different from any other book that I've written is, most of my books all rhyme. Most of my books are very they're upbeat. They have they almost read themselves. And this book doesn't rhyme. It's more of a story based, and it is just, it's a thoughtful, beautiful, meaningful book. And I'm just really honored to kind of just be a part of it all. So,
I want to dig into what is God like, but before I have to ask, what was it like writing something that somebody else started, something that your friend started?
It was perhaps the greatest honor of my career in many ways. To be able to bring her thoughts, the things that she wanted to present to her kids first and foremost, and then also to other kids, to bring that to fruition was a deep honor that I hold sacred. I took it very seriously. My hope was, and my goal was to keep every one of her words if possible. I wanted to keep every single word she wrote. And I added my own words with great care. And because of all of the people who loved her, I even invited many of her friends to kind of throw in a couple ideas here and there, because I didn't want it to feel like I took her idea and made it my own. I wanted it to feel like I took her idea and just brought it across the finishing line and kept it as much Rachel as I possibly could. And honestly, there's been a couple people who have had the opportunity to read it ahead of time, and that has been the most incredible compliment from some of her closest friends, was that this book feels like Rachel. And so it was a wonderful honor to answer your question, and I hold it very, very dear.
Did you feel, this is going to sound, I don't know how else to ask it, but I'm curious. Did you feel like she was with you as you were writing?
Yes. I told her, her husband on a couple occasions that I was like, there were moments when I was writing this book where I swear I felt like I was channeling her. Like there was just this, maybe it was the Holy Spirit, maybe it was God. Like it was just something, there was just this closeness. And it was really like losing her was a really hard, difficult season for many of us. But it was working on this book was also healing for me. It was really one of the more beautiful things that I got to experience during a really difficult season. And so like there's a lot of heart and passion and beauty poured into these pages.
This is going to sound like a out there question, and I apologize, but did you feel in some way that as you were writing this book and you said that you felt Rachel's presence, did you kind of feel at some points that Rachel was introducing you to God? It's like, I'm here with him right now, Matthew. Here's God.
That's a really beautiful way of stating something that I'm not sure I would have put that into words that way, but there's a lot of truth to that. There's, I think, Rachel's words gave me hope. And so, yes, in a way, Rachel was introducing me to God and letting me see God through her experience and through her eyes and through her words. I don't know how all that works, but there's something very true about what you just said. I wouldn't have worded it that way before, but
well, you're a much more elegant wordsmith than
No,
I
don't mean that. I mean, I thought that was a really beautiful way of explaining it, because I mean, I think that we all have experiences with God, and we all like this was for me writing this book, there was something truly sacred about it, because of when you talk to people who knew Rachel's work, and they read her book or they followed her career on the internet, the one common thing that most of them will say is that Rachel helped me get through this. Rachel helped me find freedom from this situation. And so there is something very, very special about my friendship to Rachel and her friendship to God. There was something very special about who and how she interacted with God. And so, yes, writing this book and taking her words and bringing them to life, it was by far one of the greatest honors that I've ever had to gotten to do. So there is something for me personally. I feel very invested in it, and it's so funny because I'm invested in my own books too. But it's easier for me to get really, really passionate and excited about this book. But I think it's because I'm at a healthier place in my own life. Mm-hmm. So, in my own story.
If you would like to listen to our entire conversation with Matthew Paul Turner, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Search out What is God Like? It was published June 15th, 2021. Hey, it's about time for us to wrap up this edition of Reading with Your Kids Rewind. We want to thank you for joining us. We want to thank our guest, Father James Martin, Phil Joel, Father Greg Boyle, Matthew Paul Turner. I want to give a special thanks to Rory Grady for selecting our highlights today. I also want to thank my entire team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, and want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. If you and your family celebrate Christmas, we hope you have a very love-filled and blessed Christmas. We thank you for joining us. We thank you for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of Reading with Your Kids Rewind.